Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's Art Department, reviewing simple spheres and cylinders on toned paper using both light and dark media. So I'm going to work on this Canson paper. It's Canson Dark Gray, and I'm going to use these tools, a couple erasers. For light media, I've got a white colored pencil and white chalk pastel. For dark media, I've got black colored pencil and then pencil charcoal stick. And I can do a little lay-in line work with graphite, which shouldn't show up much. So let's get started. First, let's review how we want to use our tones. So we've got two different media. We've got light and dark. And so let's start with the lightest. So if I make a little swatch here and I get it as light as I can, this is going to be our highlight. Then when we've got lit surfaces of our objects receiving light, it's going to be a little bit less light. So maybe 2, 3, 4 on our value scale. And this will be our center light. Then as we go down, we should have just gray paper. So let's call that value 5 or 6, and we'll just have that be the tone of our paper. And as we've reviewed before, we don't really want our light and dark media to mix or touch each other, so that's going to be in between. And then where we've got the darkest spot on our objects, our core shadow, that's going to be, a 7 or an 8 on our value scale. And then where we've got cast and occlusion shadows, that's going to be as dark as we can make it. So we can think about sort of those 5 values, and there'll be transitions between them, but think about them in these terms. So let's begin. Let's start with a sphere. I'm going to start by just finding a nice round thing that I can trace. Gives me a circle, and then I'm going to pick a light angle. So I'm going to pick sort of what I think of as the default light setup coming from the upper left. And then I'm going to track down at that angle where my shadow is going to fall and drop an ellipse right in here. So that gives us our general layout. Now, I like to start with my darkest darks so that I've got one end of the extreme, and then I'll move on from there. So my darkest darks are going to be right under the sphere, right in this occlusion shadow area. Oh, let's do this in charcoal. I want to just use my colored pencil for lines and edges. So, get my darkest dark, and then as I move out from underneath the sphere, I can lighten that up a little bit. So that sort of establishes our dark end of the spectrum. Those are sort of 8, 9, 10 values in there. Next, I want to find the darkest spot on my form, and that's going to be the core shadow. So I've got light coming in from here and here, and so my terminator is going to be somewhere in there. So my core shadow is the sort of moon shape below where my terminator is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a medium dark value, and I'll know I'll be able to transition from that. A little bit darker when the occlusion comes, and then up into my halftone. So let's use a little finger blend. You can use anything you want to blend. You can use a paper stump, you can use some Kleenex, you can use a chamois. I tend to just use my finger. Now you can see I'm going over the lines, and that's all right. I'm going to just wipe off on a wet paper towel. Because I've got an eraser here, so I can just come on back, clean that up. If I want to be soft with my eraser, I'm going to move on to my kneaded eraser. Clean up the halftone there. Now let's start on the other end with my white pastel. I'm going to start in with my center light, work it a little bit brighter to the center. And then again, use my finger to blend it out. As the form starts moving away from the angle of the light source, it's going to fade out into the paper. And so I want to make sure that I've got some of the gray paper between my white and my black. And again, I can use my erasers to clean up anything that I'm unhappy with. And then at the very end, I want to lay in a highlight. So actually, let's go ahead and find the very edges with the white colored pencil, and maybe down here as we come around. Just like that, so I can pop it a little bit off the gray background. And before I wrap up, I want to find where the light is going to reflect back to my eyes. So coming right through here, my highlight should be right in there. And that's the whitest this will get. All right, so there's a sphere to start with. Let's move on and do a cylinder. All right, so to start a cylinder, I'm going to put it over on this side here. I'm going to use my graphite pencil to give myself an ellipse, drop some verticals, and then a little bit fuller ellipse on the bottom. If I'm seeing the top, my bottom will be a fuller ellipse coming down. And then I'm going to run the shadow out, similar to what we've got with the sphere, but in the other direction. And I'm going to take the same approach that I did with the sphere. I'm going to find that occlusion shadow, so that's what's right underneath, right where my sphere hits the ground plane, and then I can run this out. Getting pretty dark. Then I think I'm going to jump to my charcoal stick, because this is a pretty wide area to cover. And I'm going to lighten it up a little bit as I get away from my object, and I've got more opportunities for bounce light to get in there. All right, so shadow done. Let's note our light source. So I'm going to take the light source from the upper right in this instance. And where my light comes through, my terminator is going to be about halfway, so my core shadow is just going to be a little bit less than that. So my core shadow is going to be right in to where the shadow starts. I'm going to see if I can lay it in with my charcoal stick. and then a little bit lighter as we get into our reflected light. A little bit lighter into the half tone. And then do a little finger blend. So this is the half tone as we transition from core shadow into the toned part of our object. And then here's some reflected light on our shaded side of our object. Again, not perfect with the finger, but I've got erasers to help me out here. I'm going to pull that all the way down to where it hits the shadow. All right, now onto our light media. So I'm going to find our center light, which is going to be primarily the right side here, and it's going to fade as it goes around to the half tone. So center light, fade into half tone. So this is the area of the sphere receiving the light. And then I'm going to have some on top. Make it a little bit brighter on the far side. And then ease it over. Let's take a little eraser to clean it on up. Now I'm going to use my white colored pencil. Find the edge. Where the light strikes the edge, we're definitely going to have a hot spot. And so where that my highlight's going to be, it's going to be the light's coming in, and where it bounces to hit my eye, it's going to be there. So I've got a really hot spot right on the edge, and it's going to come down into a highlight here. Something like that. A little smooth finger. Clean up this edge a little more. Do some more cleanup. All right, and I think we've got it. So just to recap, we want to identify our 5 major values: highlight, center light, the tone of the object using the paper value, then core shadow and cast shadow. Find those on our objects. So cast shadow, core shadow, tone, center light, highlight, cast shadow, reflected light, foreshadow, tone, center light, highlight. Okay, now it's your turn. Go ahead and get some practice in drawing these simple forms on toned paper with both light and dark media. Have fun.